I never thought a simple wink from my teacher would change everything, but that's exactly where this story begins. The afternoon sun poured through the tall classroom windows, painting long golden streaks across the wooden desks. The faint smell of chalk dust floated in the air, mingling with the distant hum of ceiling fans that turned lazily above us. It was the kind of day that should have felt ordinary, but it didn't. Not for me. Because she was there. Miss Hart. 45 years old, though if you'd seen the quiet grace with which she carried herself, you might have thought time had chosen to soften around her. Her voice was steady, confident, but what struck me most wasn't the authority in her tone, it was the warmth underneath it. The way she could take something as dull as grammar rules or a dense passage of literature and make it feel alive, almost personal. I tried to focus on the lesson, I really did. My pen scratched half-heartedly against the page, but my eyes kept straying to her. To the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she leaned over her notes. To the subtle smile that played on her lips when she caught a student answering correctly. To the quiet power of her presence, a kind of maturity that made the room feel settled, safe. Then it happened. She moved down the row of desks, heels clicking softly on the floor, her perfume a faint trace of jasmine following in her wake. When she stopped beside me, my pulse jumped in my throat. She bent slightly, her hand brushing across the edge of my desk as she looked at my notes. Her fingers were close enough that I could see the delicate silver ring she always wore, the one that glinted faintly under the sunlight. "You'll need to work on this part," she said, her voice low, "just for me." Her hand rested briefly on my shoulder as she pointed out the mistake, and in that tiny, fleeting moment, I felt an unexpected warmth. It wasn't just her touch, it was the way her presence filled the space around me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and she straightened up. Then, as if sensing my unease, she smiled, and winked. It was playful, harmless even. The kind of gesture a teacher might give to ease a student's nerves. But to me, it felt like something more. A crack in the professional walls between us. A glimpse of something warmer, softer. The classroom noise carried on as usual, the rustle of notebooks, the cough of someone in the back row, but inside, I felt suspended in that single moment. I wondered if anyone else had noticed. Probably not. But for me, the room had changed. I stared back down at my notes, my hand unmoving, and realized that I was no longer just learning from her. I was drawn to her confidence, her ease, her quiet elegance. And though I couldn't admit it, not yet, part of me already knew, this was only the beginning. The classroom slowly emptied, one desk at a time, until only the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of departing footsteps remained. The echoes of laughter and conversation faded down the hallway, leaving the air heavy with a hush that felt strangely intimate. I lingered, gathering my notes with deliberate slowness, as though leaving too quickly would break the spell of her presence. She was still at the front, sliding her books into neat stacks, her fingers trailing across the desk with absent grace. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows, catching strands of her hair and turning them into threads of gold. For a moment, I simply watched her, the way she moved with calm certainty, like someone who had nothing to prove and yet, somehow, drew every eye without trying. "Still here?" she asked, her tone casual, though her gaze softened when it landed on me. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. "Yeah, just, finishing up." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. Then she smiled, not the polite smile she gave in class, but something more personal, more knowing. She walked over, her heels clicking lightly against the floor, and stopped just beside my desk. Her presence filled the space before I could even look up. "You've got potential," she said, her voice lower now, as though meant only for me. "But you need a little extra work. One-on-one." She paused, letting the words hang between us. Then she added with a playful lift of her brow, "You'll need a private lesson." The words alone might have sounded routine, but the way she said them, there was something else woven in. Something that made the air feel heavier, more charged. And when she gave a quick wink, the same as before, but closer this time, unmistakable, my breath caught. I tried to laugh it off, to hide the rush of heat in my chest. A private lesson, huh? Sounds serious. Her lips curved into a smile, and for a brief second, it felt like she was testing me, like she wanted to see if I'd step closer or back away. Tomorrow after class, she said simply, her tone returning to that familiar balance of warmth and authority. But her eyes lingered just a second longer than they needed to, and in that pause, the meaning deepened. She handed me a sheet of paper she'd marked. Our fingers brushed. The contact was nothing, really, a second, maybe two. But the warmth of her skin stayed with me even after she pulled away. "Don't be late," she said, her voice softer now, almost teasing. Then she turned, gathering the last of her papers, leaving me sitting there with my heart thudding and my mind replaying every word. As I finally walked out of the classroom, the hallway felt brighter, louder, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was tomorrow. The private lesson. And the way her eyes had met mine, steady and unguarded, just before she'd winked. The next afternoon arrived faster than I expected. All through the day, my mind kept circling back to her words, the way she'd said private lesson with that playful edge. By the time class ended, my chest carried a nervous hum I couldn't quiet. Students filed out in their usual rush, voices echoing down the hallway, but I stayed behind, my notebook tucked under my arm like a fragile excuse. She was waiting. Her office was tucked away in a quieter corner of the building, a place I'd never had reason to visit. When she pushed the door open and motioned me inside, the world outside seemed to fall away. Gone was the harsh brightness of fluorescent classroom lights. Instead, a warm amber glow spilled from a desk lamp, softening the room and giving it a kind of hush, almost like stepping into someone's living room. Stacks of books lined the shelves, papers fanned out across her desk in a way that looked messy yet personal. A framed photograph sat beside a ceramic mug half filled with tea, its faint herbal scent mixing with the gentle notes of her perfume. I realized, with a sudden awareness, that this was her space, not just the teacher I saw in front of the class, but her. "Sit," she said lightly, nodding toward a chair pulled close to her desk. I obeyed, setting my notebook down. She took the seat beside me, not across from me, and the closeness startled me. Her sleeve brushed against my arm as she leaned in, flipping open my notes with careful fingers. The simple contact, fabric against fabric, her nearness, made my breath falter in a way I hoped she didn't notice. "You're bright," she said, scanning the page. "But you rush. You don't always see the details." Her tone was firm, professional, but there was no distance in it. Each word carried warmth, as though she wasn't just critiquing but guiding me. She picked up her pen and began underlining a passage, the ink gliding smoothly across the page. When she handed the pen back, her fingers brushed against mine, lingering for the briefest second longer than necessary. I tried to focus on the lesson, on the words she was explaining, but the air felt charged, alive. The soft clink of her bracelets each time she gestured, the faint steam still rising from her mug, the way the lamplight traced the curve of her cheekbone, it all pressed into me at once. "You see?" she asked, her voice dropping just slightly, as though the quiet demanded it. She leaned closer, her hair grazing my shoulder as she pointed to a line in the text. I nodded, though my eyes weren't really on the page anymore. They were on her hand, steady on the paper, close enough that I could feel its warmth radiating into the space between us. The lesson continued, words and explanations filling the silence, but beneath it all ran something unspoken. A current neither of us named, but both of us felt, undeniable, steady, waiting for its moment to surface. The minutes slipped by in that warm little office, though I barely noticed. What should have felt like a study session had become something else entirely, a space filled with soft light, hushed voices, and the quiet awareness of how close we were. Still, there were pauses. Pauses that seemed heavier than the lesson itself. At one point, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, sighing gently as though she'd just remembered the weight of the world outside. The lamplight caught the faint lines at the corner of her eyes, not unkind, but telling of years lived, of burdens carried. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I wonder why I still do this. Teaching. Giving so much of myself every day." Her gaze drifted to the shelves of worn books, then back to me. "It feels like most people my age don't understand me anymore." The honesty in her voice startled me. It wasn't the polished authority she wore in class, it was raw, unguarded. And in that moment, I felt something shift. She wasn't just my teacher, she was a woman, carrying her own doubts, her own quiet loneliness. I wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but all I managed was, "I think you're more understood than you realize." My voice was awkward, hesitant, but sincere. Her eyes lingered on me, soft and searching, as though she was trying to decide whether to believe me. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint ticking of a clock on the wall and the steady patter of rain beginning against the window. And that's when the weight of it all settled on me. The closeness. The way her sleeve brushed my arm whenever she leaned over. The subtle warmth of her voice when she said my name. The small touches, innocent on the surface, that left me restless inside. Part of me wanted to stay in that moment forever. To forget the lines between student and teacher, between youth and experience, and simply reach for the connection that pulsed like a quiet secret between us. But another part of me hesitated. What if I was misreading it? What if this was nothing more than kindness? A friendly wink, a reassuring touch, and I was foolish enough to imagine more. She must have felt the hesitation too, because her gaze slipped away, returning to the open book on the desk. She tapped her pen lightly, a nervous rhythm, before clearing her throat. "Let's get back to the lesson." Her tone was gentle, but there was something guarded in it now. A wall rising, just high enough to remind us of the rules, of the expectations. Yet when she leaned over again to underline another passage, her hand brushed mine, soft, fleeting, and neither of us pulled away as quickly as we should have. The contact lingered, barely a second, but enough to betray the truth. The boundary was there. We both knew it. And yet, piece by piece, we were testing its edges. The rain outside had deepened into a steady rhythm, tapping against the window like a metronome that paced our silence. My notebook lay open between us, words scattered half-finished across the page. I tried to concentrate, but the nearness of her, the faint warmth of her arm brushing mine every so often, made the words blur together. She noticed my hesitation, of course. Ms. Hart always noticed. "Here," she said gently, taking the pen from my hand. Her fingers closed around mine, warm and sure, guiding the pen back to the page. Her hand didn't just correct my writing, it enveloped mine, her skin soft yet steady against my palm. Together we traced the line of ink, her breath brushing close to my ear as she leaned in. For a heartbeat, the room felt impossibly small, like the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. "There," she murmured, her voice low, almost coaxing. "See how the meaning changes when you slow down." I nodded, though I hardly processed the sentence. My attention was caught on the weight of her hand resting against mine, the subtle press of her fingertips. It was such a simple act, yet it grounded me and set every nerve in me alight all at once. When she finally let go, the absence was immediate, like stepping out of sunlight into shadow. I wanted to reach back, to hold on longer than I should. She must have felt it too, because instead of pulling fully away, she rested her hand on the edge of the desk, just inches from mine. Our fingers hovered close, separated only by a breath of space. The silence thickened. The clock ticked, the rain drummed, and still neither of us moved. I risked a glance at her, and in that moment, her eyes met mine. No longer guarded, no longer simply kind. They held something steadier, something that admitted what neither of us had dared to say aloud. I swallowed, my chest tight. "You make it seem easier," I whispered, unsure if I meant the lesson or everything else. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes didn't waver. Maybe that's what I'm here for. Her words were layered, innocent enough to pass, but heavy enough to mean so much more. On instinct, my hand inched closer, not touching yet, just closing that invisible gap. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her pinky brush against mine, so lightly it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. We both knew it. That small, almost imperceptible contact shifted everything. It was a gesture both timid and daring, a confession without a word. For the first time, the boundary between teacher and student, between woman and man, blurred into something fragile but real. And though nothing more was spoken, I felt it in my bones. The line we had danced around for days had finally been crossed, if only by the touch of two hands resting side by side on a desk in a quiet office, with the rain bearing silent witness. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, streaking the window with silver lines that caught the lamplight. Inside her office, everything felt suspended, the books, the silence, the steady rhythm of our breathing. My hand still rested close to hers on the desk, the faint brush of her pinky against mine echoing louder in my chest than any word could. I should have spoken. I should have pulled back. Instead, the truth slipped out in a voice quieter than I meant. I don't think this is just about lessons anymore. The words hung between us, fragile, dangerous, yet liberating. I braced myself for the wall to return, for her to smile politely, withdraw, remind me of the rules we both knew. But she didn't. Her eyes softened, and for a long moment, she said nothing. Then she leaned back slightly, folding her arms across her lap as though to steady herself. "Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me the way you just did?" she asked. Her voice was low, unsteady in a way I had never heard from her before. I blinked, unsure what to say. How did I look at you?" "Like I mattered," she whispered. "Not just as your teacher. Not as the woman who explains things on a chalkboard. But me. Just me." Her confession landed in my chest with unexpected weight. The strong, composed woman I admired was letting me see the part of her that ached, the part that craved to be noticed, not for her authority, but for her humanity. Without thinking, I shifted closer. My hand lifted, hesitating in the air before I touched her cheek. The warmth of her skin met my palm, and I felt the faint tremor of her breath. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. "You matter," I said softly, the words steady this time. "You matter more than you know." Her eyes closed, just for a second, as though she was letting the truth sink into her. Then she opened them again, meeting mine with a mixture of strength and vulnerability. Slowly, carefully, she reached for me, her hand resting against the back of my neck, her thumb brushing lightly against my hairline. And then she drew me into her arms. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't reckless. It was grounding, a hug that wrapped me in warmth and steadiness, her cheek resting lightly against mine. Her heartbeat was soft but steady against my chest, and I found myself breathing in rhythm with her. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. There was no classroom, no titles, no expectations. Just two people holding onto each other in the quiet, finding solace in the nearness they'd both been denying. When she finally pulled back, her hand lingered on my shoulder, her eyes searching mine. "This is complicated," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But I don't regret it." Neither did I. The rain had stopped by the time we finally let go of each other. Outside, the world looked freshly washed, streets gleaming with reflected lamplight, leaves dripping quietly, as if everything had paused to listen and then exhaled. Inside her office, though, the air still carried the warmth of our closeness. Neither of us rushed to speak. We just sat there for a moment, facing each other, the silence not heavy this time but gentle, almost companionable. She shifted slightly, her hand still resting on my shoulder. Her thumb brushed once, lightly, before she let it fall back to her lap. A smile touched her lips, not playful like before, but soft, genuine. "You know," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "maybe this lesson was never about the books. Her words made me laugh, though it came out low, almost breathless. Then what was it about? Her eyes lingered on me, searching, as though weighing how much truth to let me see. Finally, she said, maybe it was about being reminded that connection doesn't always follow rules. The admission landed in the space between us like a promise. I nodded, not daring to push for more, because the meaning was already clear. We didn't speak of boundaries, or what tomorrow might bring. Instead, she reached for her mug of tea, now cold, and set it aside. Then, in an unspoken agreement, we both leaned back slightly, shoulders pressing together as we shared the same small chair. It was awkward, cramped even, but neither of us moved away. For a while, we just sat like that. My arm brushed against hers, her presence steady at my side. She pointed to a line in the book still open on the desk, a trivial note, really, something small we'd skipped over earlier. We both laughed at it, the sound breaking the tension and filling the room with an easy warmth. And in that laughter, something shifted again, not a spark this time, but a quiet certainty. When the clock on the wall chimed softly, she turned to me with a look that made my chest tighten. Not regret. Not fear. Something steadier. Maybe this lesson, she said, echoing her earlier words with a faint smile, is just the beginning. She didn't say more, and she didn't need to. The meaning was there, tucked in the way her fingers brushed mine one last time as she closed the book and gathered her papers. When I finally stood to leave, the office felt different, not smaller, not brighter, but marked by the memory of what had passed between us. She walked me to the door, her hand lingering at my arm as she said softly, "Good night. Don't forget what we covered." "I won't," I whispered, knowing she meant far more than the lesson. The hallway greeted me with its usual hum, students' voices distant, footsteps echoing on polished floors. Yet everything felt changed. The warmth of her hand still clung to mine, the steadiness of her embrace still pressed against my chest. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized that what began as a wink in a crowded classroom had become something deeper, a quiet connection neither of us had expected, but both of us had chosen to keep. If you enjoyed this slow burn age gap romance, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories just like this. And tell me in the comments, would you have said yes to that private lesson? I'd love to hear your thoughts.